Welcome, welcome, welcome. Part of our continuing series on political division in America, where we talk to philosophers, writers, columnists, scholars, and professors trying to bring you the most up-to-date information and so that you can make a decision with us today. We're very pleased to have James E. Hawdon, Department of Sociology at Virginia Tech College of Liberal Arts and Human Sciences. James Hawdon, Professor and Director, Center for Peace Studies and Violence Prevention. Professor Hawdon's research investigates the role of communities in promoting, deterring, and reacting to crime, violence, and tragedies. His most recent work focuses on how communities are responding to the COVID-19 pandemic, and his ongoing research has studied online communities and how these pattern exposures to and participation in online extremism, which is directly related to this. He has published 8 books or edited books and more than 100 articles, book chapters, or research reports in the areas of terrorism and violent extremism, criminology, the sociology of drugs, the sociology of policing, disaster research, and research methodologies. His research has been funded by the National Science Foundation, the National Institute of Justice, the National Funding Collaboration on Violence Prevention, and several other foundations. He has conducted dozens of interviews for various local, national, and international media outlets, and his work has been cited in media outlets in countries from around the world. We're going to be talking to the professor today about this research published in 2020, Social Media Use, Political Polarization, and Social Capital. Is social media tearing us apart? Professor, did I get anything wrong with the introduction, your background in the study?
Nope, sounds about right.
Okay. Well, then let's start with this. This is the question I always ask people. You did this study in 2020. It's talking about social media and political polarization. Why did you do the study? Why did you do the study in 2020? What was going on? Why was this a worthy topic of investigation? Why study this topic at the year that you did? What was going on in America, and how did you view it, and how did you view this study as a reaction to that?
Yeah. Okay. So, of course, what was going on in America is, I think it's fairly well documented that political polarization has been increasing within, and not to overstate that. We have a tendency to overstate that. I hear people say, like, we've never been as polarized, but that obviously is not true. We were actually shooting each other in the 1860s. So we've been polarized before, but the polarization seemed to be getting more intense, and the extremes seem to be getting more extreme. And so that was going on. There was lots of social commentary about that. And really looking for the source of this and looking to see if indeed our media consumption and changes in patterns of media consumption is a primary driver of that. So this was part of a larger NSF study where we were trying to measure polarization using unobtrusive measures, in really looking at the media and how the media was talking about issues, and if they're discussing it in a polarized fashion. So part of that study, we wanted to look at, could we capture polarization in a more traditional way, largely using survey research, and use that to link with what we were trying to get in a basically by coin news stories and looking at the way using sentiment analysis to determine how polarized stories in the newspaper are. So this was kind of a early step of that larger research project.
Let me just read a little bit on the background on the study, if I may. While some polarization is potentially beneficial for democracy, hyperpolarization can lead to political gridlock, tribalism, and even physical violence. Given the gravity of these concerns, we use data from 1,424 residents of Virginia, USA, to investigate if media exposure is related to polarization. We explore if getting news from traditional media, television, radio, newspapers, or social media, Facebook, Twitter, news aggregators, predicts the likelihood of being polarized. Results reveal stark differences between liberals and conservatives. Polarized conservatives use radio talk shows and television for the news, while polarized liberals are likely to get their news from newspapers, television, and various social media outlets. We then investigate if polarization influences social capital. We find that polarized conservatives express low levels of bridging capital, while polarized liberals are more likely to express high levels of bonding capital. Media consumption also influences bridging and bonding capital. We also find that while being polarized does not predict civic engagement, media consumption does. We find these results disturbing. Let me repeat that. We also find that while being polarized does not predict civic engagement, media consumption does. We consider these results disturbing, at least among the political extremes. Conservatives and liberals are informed by different sources. This lack of shared information results in competing worldviews while providing little opportunity for finding common ground. This combination of high bonding, low bridging capital can explain the recent increase in lethal partisanship. How bad is the media, social media, at making people be polarized? And is this new? Has it always been this way? I've heard people say, well, cable media goes back CNN to 1990. But I've also heard people say not like now, like when 2016 happened and the entire media establishment basically said, we're not going to be fair to Donald Trump and we're going to get him. I mean, they kind of admitted that. Have we been here before in American history? You were talking about, hey, it's not the Civil War. Have we been at this level of polarization because of media before? Is it increasingly more bad than just 5 years ago? How should we think about this, Professor?
Yeah, so I think that we have been our media, right? Our media has driven polarization before, and we have always had, left-leaning and right-leaning media, right? That has always been the case. But I do think it's become a little more intense, just because we are lacking what we had in the past. If you think about another very polarized time in history, say the 1960s, early 1970s, right? What we had then was you could certainly find your underground left-wing media sources if you wanted to find them. And similarly, you could find your right-wing media sources. But we all had, CBS News that we watched, right? NBC, right? There were only 3 networks. People watched those news channels. Most people got their news from either, a combination of those and the newspaper, right? And the newspaper that you got, unless you actively sought out kind of the, if you will, for lack of a better term, the more extreme leaning papers, either left or right. Unless you actively sought those out, you were getting your news from largely from the local papers, right?
Right.
And they were largely informed through the AP wire, and so there was well, undoubtedly this was filtered. This news was filtered. There has always been gatekeepers over information. And what made it to the editing through the editor's desk, right, was largely filtered by the editorial board's political leanings. And we've always had that. That's inescapable.
Sure.
However, we all read that, right? So if your political inklings were right wing, mine was left wing, we all were reading and hearing, say CBS News. So we were all hearing the same message, right?
Right.
And
Right.
while we undoubtedly interpreted those messages through our lens, our own political lens, we were at least interpreting the same message.
You used to have Buckley, extreme conservative, but he was on network TV, but you had to go back 3 to 4 decades to find.
Right. Well, certainly. And
is that what you're getting at? Is that what you're getting at? Like, you used to go back. I'm old enough. I'm 46 to remember being a boy. And you used to have, there's these channels. And that show was known as conservative or liberal, but they'd be on the same network.
Right. Yes. And because there was very limited choice, right? If you were watching TV, that's what you watched.
Right.
There wasn't this, just endless supply of media. And if you contrast that to what we have today, first of all, you don't really have to look very hard to find relatively extremist left-wing or right-wing media, right? That's a very simple search in the media will produce, God, how many thousands of hits that will allow you to tailor to focus your attention on, I want a right-wing view of this, or that's what I agree with. And because there's just so much out there, we are less and less likely to see the same information, right? Mm-hmm. So say you get your news from the newspapers, even if you're using mainline newspapers, and I'm getting my news from mainline television, and a third person's getting it from mainline social media. We're seeing completely different stories, even completely different topics, let alone take on those topics, right? So that creates kind of these silos, if you will, of information. And then an exasperating fact of it is that the way social media works in particular, and when I say this about social media, we're thinking about online news, but if we remember, most people are now reading, their newspapers, even if it's the New York Times, they're reading it online, right? And the way that online world works is it personalizes, these search engines and everything personalize your experience based on what you click on. So as you click on information about political polarization, for example, that's what you're fed. Whereas I click on information about race cars, that's what I'm fed. So you go off into your little world knowing a lot about political polarization. I go off knowing about race cars, and we never talk to each other.
Does this go back before 2015? The things you described seem to, yes, the parts were always there. The internet goes back to the 90s.
Yeah.
The cable news, Ted, whatever his name is, the billionaire who married Jane Fonda, CNN, et cetera. But it seems like the convergence of factors that you're describing doesn't, in my mind, go back before 2015.
You know what?
Could we put around there,
Yeah,
2015-ish,
I would, yeah, I'm not comfortable like giving a specific date,
Sure.
but that's just because I really haven't looked at the data. But I would say yes. I think you're right
Roughly
in and around that.
in roughly in and around ish. Not
It,
trying to get you to say something without the research, but ish,
yeah,
roughly.
I think and if you think about the coalescing forces, one of the things that really drives that and would put it around that time, early 2010s, early to mid 2010s, is the widespread use of social networking sites, um, which really starts fueling the getting news online. And that's at the same time that newspaper sales are starting to go down, so they start converting to online readership, and we start getting streaming of newscasts. So if you happen to miss the political rant from Fox News or MSNBC or whichever, you could always catch that later.
Right.
Just by
Right.
streaming. So in all those forces, yeah, I think that's about right. About the timing is about
Ish. I
right.
remember Jon Stewart.
And
Jon Stewart, who was famous for doing online news. Yeah, it was comedy, but at some point people just took their news from there. I think a year ago he said that he was wrong and there never should have been 24-hour news. It's 24-hour news is just bad. It should be 1 or 2 hours a day, period. And this is coming from a guy who had participated in that. Thoughts, feelings about that comment from him?
yeah, I would have to agree with that. The problem with 24-hour news, I mean, if it was 24-hour news, truly 24-hour news, I would be fine with that, although nobody would read it.
Honest man. I love the honesty.
Ratings would be horrible because, but if you look at what our news is now, it is a clip of what happened, right? So 8 people shot in Texas, right? There's the news. Then it's 24 hours of a bunch of people, talking heads, telling me how I should interpret that.
Right.
So if news channels had to actually label like what was news versus what was commentary versus what was just complete editorializing, right? We would find that we're nowhere close to 24-hour news, right?
Fair.
But if you think about it, if it was 24 hours of just factual observation, your mind would go numb after 15 minutes and you never turn it back on. I mean, if you think about it, it's like C-SPAN, right? Like, who actually watches C-SPAN?
Yeah, I can do 2 hours max, and then that's it for about a week.
That's you. You're actually interested in politics.
I'm sick. I have a sickness.
So if you think about it, we're not we get so much commentary and editorializing, and of course, if you're going to be on for 24 hours, you got to do that. You got to fill that time somehow.
Sure, but I saw this argument with the print news, and the print news was doing the same thing. I remember when the Sandy Hook shooting happened, you had big newspapers going, well, we've got to ban guns. And you read, and it was on the front page, and you read. And then at the very bottom, it goes, this is an opinion from so-and-so. Yeah. Didn't say opinion piece at the top. It was presented on the front page like it was fact. And I noticed that called attention to the fact that the TV news does that all the time. So They'll say, we're a news station, bringing the news to you, etc. And it never says, I'm a commenter. This is commentary. This is not technical. There's nothing marking that. And the person will use all sorts of language. I'm a news person. I'm bringing you news. Maybe they won't say I'm technically a news person as the law would define it, but they'll say things that push you that way, definitely confusing people. What can we fix this? Can we fix it?
Well,
how do we fix it? Can we depolarize the media? It wasn't always this way, as we've talked about, or at least this bad. Can we undo it?
Yeah. So can we?
Yeah.
Yes, I think we could.
Your slow response does not give me lots of confidence. I'm sorry.
Well,
yeah, totally.
Yeah, I am.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
I'm a realist. The thing is, I think we can do it. I am very, very skeptical that we will. And
how would we do it, and why are you skeptical that we could pull it off?
Okay, so I think we can do it by largely kind of as you just hinted at, instead of having it, even if it's the headline, it has to be headline editorial, guns should be bad, right? Or in just pointing out that. And I mean, if you go back to before we repealed the truth and fairness doctrine, and recognizing there was problems with that, but at least the intent of that, of having both sides of the story told, right? Something like that, and having in essence, we have warning labels on beer and cigarettes, right? We could have warning labels on information that this is an opinion, whereas this is just stating what has been observed by multiple people, and a consensus about what happened.
Just the facts, ma'am.
And then make with that information what you will, right? That's and I think that could help. And and really, this would be a first step. We need to do better in terms of educating people about media literacy and about data literacy in general. Just because you read it on the internet does not mean it's has been well vetted. And I mean, I could type anything on the internet, and I just had pizza with 42 aliens, right? And,
I remember the Sun News article talking about Hunter Biden's laptop, and every single major news agency that purports to check their facts and get it straight, and we're better than the independent media, all lied. None of them checked it, and all did misinformation.
Yeah.
So if that's the mainstream news, my God.
Yeah.
Why do you think we won't? Yeah, I'm sorry.
Undoubtedly, on the mainstream news is, and that you see people do this all the time, but so you report that you checked it. Well, I trust you, so I report that I checked it, and it just becomes one big self-supporting, self-generating machine that perpetuates misinformation. Yeah. So I think we could do it. I think we could do a much better job than we do of promoting data literacy, being able to separate opinion from fact, knowing that difference. I am very skeptical that we will, largely because the current situation is very profitable. There are a lot of people making a lot of money off of the current situation, and there is increasing, not only are the media companies and the social networking and the algorithms that are used to personalize the online space, all of that is just fuels profit, right?
Right.
But we
Right.
also have a political system that rewards polarization. We have a political system, and this is, of course, kind of always been the case, but with the two-party winner-take-all system,
Right.
we have gotten to the point where a win for the Democrats, no matter how good it is for the country, is defined as a loss by the Republicans.
Right.
And the win for the Republicans, regardless of how good it is for the country, is it's a loss to the Democrats. And of course, this leads to the case where politics are largely driven by, if you will, the kind of the extremes of the party, right? If you think about the whole primary system, right, you are more likely to get, you are, as a moderate Democrat, you are more threatened by the more radical left than you are by another moderate Democrat or even a Republican. And the moderate Republican is threatened more by the radical right than, so.
I was here in California when Trump was elected. People lost their mind. And then I remember when Biden was elected in Texas, immediately had all these high-ranking officials going, well, we're going to secede. So let me ask you two questions. They're sort of related. The first one is, let's say you had a magic wand. You got a magic wand. It's in your hand. You wave that thing. It's like Thanos in the Marvel movies. Reality changes instantly. No drawbacks, instantaneous. You wave your magic wand and go, abracadabra, media depolarized to the way that it was back in 2014. Boom, poof. Is polarization fixed in America and we have no problems?
I think you have to go back
further. Guy, and if we get rid of this bad guy, we go back and we didn't have any problems and everything was great.
I think you'd have to go back further than that, but even then, again, as we note in the article, some polarization is okay, right? That's what gets it. It's really the extreme polarization, and if indeed we are correct, as you and I have been talking, that somewhere around 2014 or so, the confluence events happened that drove this. I think we could get back to a healthier state of polarization. The forces of polarization really, I mean, we started seeing really unnerving signs, from my opinion. Really, even going back to with Clinton and George W. Bush, and where people were vehemently opposed to them because of them, right? Not necessarily because of their policy. It's just like, I hate them. And, there was the personalization of politics that, it's always been around, of course, but it seemed to just get more visceral then. And so I think maybe if we got back to 2014, we could slow it down, um, and we could at least get back to a healthier state. I still think we were on the road to political gridlock, but we would maybe slow that down a little bit.
So if we could fix it, it would reduce it. But you, I think, said, you had to go further back. And it sounds like you're going all the way back to the beginning of Clinton, around the 1990s, where you started to notice polarization. 1990s-ish in general, ish, where you started to see some polarization. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, that might, and this is, I'm just going to say that this is probably more due to, I might be overstating that, right? Because
Sure.
just thinking about the reaction of people to Lyndon Johnson and to Richard Nixon, and so we've kind of always had that, but it seemed to get worse, at least, and this may just be that I had a better understanding of it. I was older and had done a lot more reading, but it seemed to get worse beginning in the 90s. And that very well might be, that would correspond with the emergence, really getting rid of the truth and fairness doctrine, and that more polarized media.
The 1990s lines up with a lot of research on political polarization as the start of this. So that's why I was asking, and I understand it's a intelligent guess you're making, but your guess lines up with what a lot of other researchers have said. So I just found that interesting. I was trying to pull that out of you to see where it was going to go, because this is about the experts and what sort of patterns we're seeing with them. Before I dig back on that, how bad is polarization now to the 1960s? Just as bad, not as bad, worse?
I think that's a complex, kind of a complex question.
Sure.
In many respects, it's not as bad. I mean, if you think about as horrific as the headlines have been with politically motivated mass shootings and things of that nature, we have to keep this in historic context. And acts of terrorism in this country, domestic terrorism in this country, are way down compared to the late 60s and early 70s.
Right.
Right. So in that sense, it's hard for me to sit here and say, oh, it's worse now than, right. I'm not convinced that it is at that level. Yet I do think, and again, just as in the 60s, it's the polarization really happens at the fringes, right? If you look at the data, from the 60s as well as now, the majority of people agree on lots of things, right? That there is widespread consensus, or at least a shared reality by a very large percentage of our population on a lot of issues. So that polarization is at the fringe, and at that extent, I don't think we're any more polarized now than we were, say, in the 60s. I think there is something of a new danger that wasn't there in the 60s, that I think is present now. And that is the delegitimation or the deinstitutionalization of the delegitimation of our major institutions coming from both sides of the aisle, right? Um, we have frequently, our institutions have rightfully been critiqued by both the left and the right over time. They have rightfully been supported by the left and the right over time, right? But like, so in the 1960s, for example, a lot of critique was coming from the political left, and the political right was largely in support of them. But what we're seeing today is, well, I guess I should say there have been other times where our institutions have been critiqued and criticized by the political right and supported by the political left. Right? But today we're seeing our institutions being, all of them being critiqued by both sides. If from the left, the questioning of the criminal justice system. From the right, the whole questioning of our elections. There's been the questioning of science from both sides, depending on what the issue is. The questioning of our, COVID led to the questioning of our major health institutions, and and all of these forces. We have questions about the legitimacy of our Supreme Court that really haven't been seen since the 1860s.
Thank you.
So if you think about it, this leads to a situation where where do we go? Where who do we turn to? And and this isn't to say that these critiques aren't rooted in good evidence, and critiques should be made. Our institutions, we get in trouble if we just blindly follow our institutions all the time. Institutions can institutionalize a lot of very ugly things, but so what they should be reviewed and critiqued. But when this critique is happening from at all sides, and my question is, where do we land?
Right.
We obviously need these institutions. And we need for people to have faith in that they will operate as they should, and in a just way, and promote social well-being. And that's not there. There's a lot of questioning of that at the moment.
That has been backed up by other people too, what you just said.
Exactly.
The 1960s, yes, more violent than it is now, of course. But in the 60s, people had common respect for institutions. Now we have the lowest respect in 40 years for Congress, the presidency, the Supreme Court, and basically even like the FBI and every form of government agency. Additionally, you have on the left questioning if somebody was legitimately elected for 4 years, and now on the right, questioning if somebody was legitimately elected for 4 years. None of that happened in the 60s. You did not have, I'm going to ignore the Supreme Court. I don't know if Nixon really won. Let's hold out for the next 4 years and just say he didn't. Or I don't know if Humphrey was going to. Let's just hold out for the next 4 years and say he should have won. None of that. So, and what I'd heard from some of the other professors was as bad as it got, because you had common faith and common institutions, it kept these people together. When you don't have common faith and common institutions, you're able to see them as the enemy to a degree that you were limited by in the 1960s.
Precisely. And when that happens, if the system is not working, like from my perspective, I don't think the system is working. I think that the system is rigged against me, or is just totally ineffective, or whatever. Then I'm going to take matters into my own hands, right? And um, I
Right.
will I will I will do whatever it takes to protect my interests, to protect my family's interests, and you know, this is not a very healthy situation.
Yeah, we don't need to go into it. I would refer everybody to Stephen Marsh. Stephen Marsh, Canadian author, and he wrote Dispatches from the Second Civil War. If you
Yeah.
want vignettes of how this could pop off, I would say Stephen Marsh's book, uh, uh, Scenes from the Next American Civil War. It's been getting a lot of recommendations. Obviously, it's fictional. Obviously, it's a little bit for entertainment, but people have said that his hypotheses are, born out of a base of fact.
Right.
I want to ask you about if polarization seems to go back to the 1990s. Have you heard of The Big Sort by Bill Bishop?
I have not. I'm
Okay.
not familiar with that.
So roughly what it is, it's a study. NPR covered it in 2008, 2017, 2022. New York Times has covered it. Wall Street Journal has covered it. Basically, it goes like this. If you look at this map, in the top left corner, this is a presidential election by county map. And it starts in 1992, the 90s, and ends in 2016. And the pattern holds to 2020. But basically, if you look at the top map, top left corner, red means don't even run here if you're a Democrat. You have no chance by like 20 percentage points. It's called landslide. Like you're not the person beats you by 20 points. There's no way in hell you're getting
Right.
it. We're talking like Clinton type winning or DeSantis, election margins in Florida. Red means don't even run here if you're a Democrat. Blue means don't even run here if you're a Republican. You have no chance of winning, 20 percentage points. Gray means competitive.
Right.
Sometimes they voted this person. Sometimes they voted Nixon. Sometimes they voted Kennedy. Now, as you can see through the maps, you can go from 92 to 2016. Almost all the grays wiped out.
Yep.
And the reason they're saying is because Americans have been sorting themselves. They've been moving to ideologically compatible communities. Now, there is some debate on if people are consciously doing this. I'm a conservative surrounded by liberals. I can't stand them. I need to go to someplace surrounded by conservatives and then start voting that way. That may not be consciously happening, but there does seem to be a pattern of, I don't feel comfortable here. I'm going to move to someplace that I feel comfortable. And then over time, I basically start voting the way my neighbors do and thinking like them. And over 30 years, you've had this polarization of the counties. Obviously, some of his data was limited, but it's also been backed up by other people. Center for Crystal Ball, Virginia, same thing. They were showing landslide election counties from 2004 to 2020.
Right.
This one is one of my favorites. So this is from the Wall Street Journal, and this came out in 2020, 3 years ago. In 1974, 45% of Republicans were hardcore conservatives. They identified themselves as that. In 2016, the percentage was 76%.
Yeah.
In 1974, only 28% of Democrats identified as hardcore liberal. In 2016, it's 59%. So both of those almost doubled. They went from under half to 2/3. And if you look at this chart, it's kind of a straight line from 74 to roughly 1990. Then roughly in 1990, 1992, you see a stark trajectory going up. That lines up with the Bill Bishop theory. The other one is 538 is also backed up the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So is the Cook report. But one of my favorites here is Time Magazine. Would you date someone with different political beliefs? Here's what a survey of 5,000 single people revealed. About 1/3 in 2012 would not date somebody who does not share their politics. That rose to 50%.
Yeah.
By 2020. It went from 1/3 to 1/2 in just 8 years. The dating percentage, the landslide voting county percentage, the polarization percentages, these are all kind of lining up, and they're kind of showing something goes back to 1990. Thoughts, feelings? Does this seem out of whack? Could this be a potential theory? Does it sort of line up with some of your research, or does it not?
Yeah, I think it is in. I think does line up, and now I am familiar with the big sort art. I just didn't recognize when you.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, let me add something and then get back more directly to the question you asked. The other thing that is going on here, as we become more, 76% of Republicans, 59% of Democrats are now hardcore, right? That just feeds into the gerrymandering that has, and again, gerrymandering has always happened, but it seems to have gotten a lot worse. And I think that, what you have up there, the move from 92 to 2018, the fewer and fewer and fewer competitive districts. And I think that is part of that cycle, that engine, right?
It's a virtuous circle, right? It feeds into itself.
Exactly. As we become more hardcore, I am more likely to, either support gerrymandering or not say anything about it or feel comfortable with it, right? And then that just gets worse. But more back to your question about the 90s. And, again, if it is indeed this polarization into more partisan camps, right? Where I'm defining myself as a you heard about like never Trumpers. Well, there are never Republicans or never Democrats. It doesn't matter. I remember living in South Carolina, and I always said, when I lived there, I always said, that the Democrats could run Jesus Christ and he would lose. Because he had a D behind his name. I mean, it was, and and that would be saying the Republicans in California would not.
Yeah.
Not
You could
fare
have
well,
Jesus
right?
Christ comes and runs as a Republican in California. He would be shut down.
Yes.
In California.
So it would be.
Yeah, that's true. That's a true statement. I never thought about that, but that is. If Jesus Christ was a Republican, hell no, he would go nowhere in California.
No,
even if they knew he was the legitimate Jesus Christ, they'd be like, yeah, but that's the old guy. Now he's hanging out with the Republicans. I don't know about this new dude.
Right.
You're right. That's how that would go.
Yeah. So, but anyhow, I do think that this is somewhat of a function of the lack of a shared narrative and a lack of which corresponds to the rise of cable news network, right? The 24-hour news cycle in the early 90s, right? Really starting with Desert Storm, as I remember it. And also corresponding with the full effects of the repeal of the Fairness Doctrine, where we are now, the increasingly being, in essence, preached to by whichever side of the aisle you're on, right? You turn to their news and you basically are just getting your opinions reinforced, and and over and over and over 24 hours a day. And I think as that happens and we hear less and less from the other side, then when we do hear something from the other side, we have already learned all of the talking points to dismiss it, right? So we just openly dismiss it,
Right.
don't really consider it. Um, and people, I think our critical thinking skills are undermined by by the lack of contrasting opinions. Um, and I might disagree with you
Of course.
passionately about a topic, but it does me good to hear your logic of why. I mean, unless you truly are an evil person with, you know, and I mean, if we base our assumption that most people aren't truly evil, most people aren't psychopaths, um, there's a reason you think why you think, right? And chances are some of those reasons can resonate with me. Um, and
Sure.
not if everything was um, was clear, there was clearly a right and a wrong political position, right? We would have all agreed on it a long time ago, right? I mean,
Yeah.
if there was only one way to accomplish a goal, we probably would agree on it. But there is at least smatterings of truth and validity in both approaches to you know the accumulation and creation and distribution of resources, which is what
True.
politics is.
True. But part of
And
the problem I see is that they call people evil and then say when
well, exactly, and it's
Tucker Carlson is evil. He's not just different. He's got to go. Trump is evil. Let's ban him from being able to say anything so nobody can listen to him. I mean, Nazi level censorship. They go because these ideas are dangerous to our society, which is exactly what the Nazis said. And we seem to have popped right back into that. That's not speech, that's hate speech. And so we can ban it. Nobody needs to hear anything about it. And if you accidentally miss some facts that no one else is mentioning, well, hey, it was worth it, right? Because we managed to stop this bad man from spreading bad ideas. Never mind that occasionally he presents truth that you won't find at any other source. Like I remember seeing the QAnon shaman at January 6th. That guy's been released from jail because of video Tucker Carlson showed, which the media will not cover at all. So, and it basically shows him being let in by the guards. There's no one surrounding him. There's no threat. They just let him in. That video was completely banned from the January 6th hearings. Comes out afterwards. It's on Tucker. He's the only place that shows it. The federal courts that prosecuted him totally undo their case and release him. It's a big about face, big shame. You never hear about any of that in the media. And then about 2 weeks after Tucker does that, he has to go and he's gone for all these other horrible reasons. And I think Tucker dog whistles racism too. I've been on a show a couple of times. I believe it. At the same time, when he showed that video about the QAnon shaman, that was a fact. Couldn't be found anywhere else. Now you'll never see it again. And that's how they get us. Let me ask you a question, if I may. Let's say we fix cable news, we fix gerrymandering. Tomorrow, you wave the wand. Poof! Gerrymandering. All future elections, totally fair. Poof! All media, totally unbiased. Will that result in Americans unsorting themselves the way they've done over 3 decades?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I don't think we really necessarily sort ourselves by political ideology as much as I think that's a spurious relationship.
Okay.
I think now where I do think we sort ourselves, and this is related to political ideology, is urban rural, right? What we largely see that this schism. I mean, if you look at the map, right, the blue is largely urban, the red is largely rural,
True.
and and that I do think is somewhat related to political ideology, but even that I think it's relatively weak. I really think that the this sorting that has happened is driven far more unconsciously than if it is at all driven
I
by
could see
politics.
that. I could see that. And that was some of the criticism, was, are people consciously doing this or not? And I've kind of moved beyond that to just, is it happening?
Yeah.
I mean, is this happening? Are people moving, and are they having their opinions hardened?
Yeah. Oh, they are definitely having their opinions hardened. That is clear, and I do think it has a lot to do with really with gerrymandering. I do think there is some kind of an urban rural
Oh, sure.
mindset, and but again, that is not new. That is not new. We have been, the the history of the prohibition of alcohol was largely an urban rural split, right? That is hardly new, but I do think that is happening, and the result is definitely a hardening, as the data clearly show that there's
That's why I'm asking people.
Yeah, there is this, as you mentioned, it's known as lethal partisanship. Not only are we calling each other evil, but we're okay with each other being harmed, even if the majority of people are not to the point where they're saying, oh well, we should shoot our political opponents, but a lot of them say, if it happens, it happens.
I saw that after January 6th.
Yeah.
I was shocked because I had, I'm a liberal, but I say I'm a liberal, but I have two eyes and they work. So I don't support all the standard costs celebrated of the liberals. And I was in Los Angeles, liberal city, and I was talking to another liberal who was in San Diego. So, and I heard both of them say, and they don't know each other, on January 6th, two different people, both liberals, no contact with each other, said the exact same thing to me the day January 6th was happening. Why didn't they just line up all 300 of them and shoot them live on TV? Yeah. And I heard two different people say that. I have never heard these people say violent things before. On January 6th, they were blood in their eyes. Get them. And I'm like, and I repeated back to them. So you're saying execute a couple hundred Americans live on television, and you think that's a good thing to do? Yep. Both of them. And I was like, wow, that's polarization. I've never seen that behavior before, ever. And two different people did it, and they didn't talk. And I'm like, how many other liberals said, if they gunned down 300 Americans live on television, blood splatter everywhere, I'd call it a good day for justice. I wonder how many liberals would say that.
Yeah.
I really do. To back up what you're talking about, this is a survey from University of Virginia Sabato Crystal Ball Center, came out in 2021, 2 years ago. Yes, it was during the pandemic, and yes, people were upset. But look at those numbers. 74% of Biden voters, 78% of Trump voters all voters from the other party are a clear and present danger to the USA. We shortened it to danger, but the real phrase was clear and present danger, meaning do you view them the way you would an ISIS attack, 9/11, or a Russian nuclear strike?
Yep.
We're looking at about 80% of both parties. View everyone in the other party is as bad as ISIS or a nuclear missile strike. Not a good sign, right?
No, not a good sign. And of course, those last two numbers there, almost half of Biden voters and slightly more than half of Trump voters are okay with a national divorce. That.
Can we put Humpty Dumpty back together? He fell off the wall.
Again, I think
the king's waiting for us. Can we do it?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure we can. I mean, I think there is certainly an external threat. Could do it. Could make us see, rally around what we have. That I think is relatively unlikely. I guess maybe, but even there, I'm not exactly sure we can see eye to eye. We being Democrats and Republicans can see eye to eye on an external threat, at least initially.
I was going to point out we did that and kind of ruined it. So we had an external threat in 2001, Al-Qaeda.
Yeah.
And we had the entire world having sympathy and all Americans united. And then by 2003, 2004, we had already pissed off most of the world and split our domestic population by saying, well, the response to this attack was to invade Iraq.
Right.
I was in California.
Yeah.
All the liberals were not for that. So we had about 3 years of a common enemy, and then we destroyed it on our own.
Yep, we did.
So, I mean, what chance are we not going to do that again in the future?
Like yeah. I mean, I would,
trash.
I think that as horrible as the threat that, as 9/11 was, and that threat, as serious as that threat was, I'm thinking a bigger threat. I'm thinking kind of World War II-ish type
space
of
space aliens. Ronald Reagan said space aliens.
Right. Yeah,
he said it. I'm not making that up.
Yeah, that's a potential. But I think the more likely scenario is that we devolve into some, relatively hot civil war, and out of that, we will, just as out of the ashes of the first Civil War, we emerged as a new country. We would likely do that again, but I sure pray that I'm wrong. I think yes, we can marry counseling.
Fair enough. We're winding down. I have like about 2 questions left for you, maybe 3. So when Marjorie Taylor Greene said on President's Day, to great controversy, we need a national divorce. The left and the right can't live with each other. There was a Utah governor who responded, and this was picked up widely. We don't need a national divorce. We need marriage counseling. Now, I saw this picked up by 30 different newspapers, but no one defined it. What does marriage counseling look like for a population of 300 million, where 4/5 of both parties feel the other side is an existential threat? How do we get all these people to come back together?
Yeah, well, I think the way we do that is by focusing on that most of us agree on a lot of things, at least to to some extent. If you think about some of our most divisive issues, be it guns, be it abortion, be it criminal justice reform, the majority of the population coalesce around a relatively moderate position, right? And it's largely the fringes on both sides that get a lot of the airplay. They scream the loudest, so they get the media attention. Um, and I think, even, as scary as the numbers you have on the screen are about, most voters are viewing the other side as dangerous. Um, we need to focus on the fact that there's a lot of agreement over some
Sure.
basic values and some basic issues, and we cannot let our politics be totally driven by the extremes of both parties. That we need to listen to those extremes. Those extremes might have good ideas, and we should hear their arguments, but we cannot let just the loudest voice in the room, either win or totally shut down debate, right? And to a large extent, that's what's happening. And a lot of it is through simple argumentum ad hominem. I'm going to call you evil. I'm going to call you a Nazi. I'm going to call you, whatever term du jour it is, right? In that, and there's my argument, and it's like, well, that's not much of an argument. That's just an attack on my person. And
who does that though?
That.
Who's the person who sets this example for 300 million Americans, who's able to bring people on the left and the right together to get them all to say, that's the way we should all behave? Who is that person that could do that, and can you name them?
I cannot name them. I don't know if such a person exists. I do think that we could take steps in it, and again, I think a lot of the steps in that direction is by having better media, the data literacy for the population. And I do think the media could take a role there in promoting, this goes against the media, right? It goes against if it bleeds, it leads. News, like you always hear people say, well, why is the news nothing but bad news? Well, it's because good news isn't interesting, right? Good news,
right.
I mean, even if you think about movies, we love dramas more than romantic comedies, right? It's
true, but we used to be able to do this.
Right.
We used to be able to do this for decades. In fact, if you go past World War II, we did it more than what we're doing now.
Yes, absolutely.
For a longer period of post good life, we did this.
Yes, and I think we can do it. I think but we need to, and largely being the media, even starting, we can talk about all of our institutions, right? We need our education institutions to really do a better job of teaching people about data literacy, about how to separate fact from opinion. Opinion is fine and it's good. We should hear each other's opinions, but we have to also be able to separate out what is solely your opinion versus what is the observable fact. We need our media to do better a job of labeling themselves as news versus opinion versus editorial. We need the media to highlight the common ground more. That needs to be leading news stories as much as you know, the political extremes, um, on either side, right? Getting the mouthpiece of the media that they get is, it's like, why are you paying this much attention to these people?
Hmm.
Why aren't you paying more attention to the people who are working across the aisle, who are trying to find actual solutions to the problems, right?
Hmm.
Why isn't that the lead story versus the, oh, I'm just going to stand here and scream, um, because you're ignoring my values, or or whatever it. And so I think that, the education system needs to step up. I think the media needs to step up. I think our politicians need to step up, and we need to we need to recognize the path that we're on is not going to end well if we stay on it, and that it would be better for me to lose the next election to you than for me to win that election and 5 years from now lose my country, right?
That's it right there.
And that we need politicians to recognize that, and to get away from this, to admit that, okay, your legislation, I was opposed to it, but okay, some good came out of it. Was it perfect? Of course not. There never been a piece of perfect legislation. So let's now fix what it didn't fix,
Right.
instead of just saying, we have to overturn it because you came from the other side of the aisle. And
Yeah.
we need to have for everybody to step up, and it can I name an individual to do that? No. My guess,
It's a question I've been asking people. I'm like, if we're going to have marriage counseling, who's going to do it?
yeah, my guess is that if there is such a person, uh, fortunately or unfortunately, this person's probably some celebrity from, either a rock star, a movie star, or that people can fall in love with the person, and then give that person enough
Hmm.
airspace where they can propose these ideas without being immediately attacked by the other side.
So
Um,
maybe The Rock will save America.
maybe The Rock, exactly.
Looking at you, you got to save America, Rock. We're winding down. I want to say thank you. I hope that you found this was a not gotcha journalism interview. It's kind of straightforward. You got to say your piece. We didn't try to play tricks or anything.
Yeah, no.
Uh, do you have anybody you could recommend? Anybody who can talk in complete sentences, somewhat thoughtful? They could be on the left, on the right. They could be an activist. They could be a reporter. They could be a professor, to talk about political division in America. No wrong or right answers. We just want to keep the conversation going.
Um, I'm sure I have lots of people, but nobody coming to mind.
Okay, I will email you in a few hours and I'll ask for recommendations if you could name anybody. And again, we're fair. We're going to do a fair job. We just want to keep the conversation going because we think it's an important conversation.
Yep, sounds good.
Okay, I'll email you very soon, Professor, and thank you for coming out.
My pleasure. Thanks.
All right, we will see you all soon. Thank you, everybody. And that's it. And we'll talk to you soon, and I'll email you shortly.